Welcome. My name is David Meltzer. I'm the Secretary General of GVF. GVF is the only global trade association for the satellite industry, with members from all over the world, all continents, save Antarctica, and our members represent the entire satellite ecosystem. This webinar is part of the GVF and Satellite Evolution Group highly acclaimed webinar series and is kindly sponsored by SES. And as many of you know, SES, with over 70 satellites in 2 different orbits, combines a vast, intelligent network of satellite and ground infrastructure with industry-leading expertise to manage and deliver high-performance video and data solutions virtually everywhere in the world. With that, let me introduce our panelists. We have a group of excellent, and as you will hear shortly, very experienced panelists, particularly in the Middle East region, which is the focus of this discussion. The first panelist I want to introduce is Hamid Nawaz. As you can see, Hamid is the General Manager for SES for Middle East and Central Asia. He's been in that position since January of 2019. And Hamid has a unique set of experiences developing and rolling out satellite networks based on a combination of middle Earth orbit, or MEO, as well as geostationary orbit, GEO satellites. Hamid is a telecommunications engineer by education and has experience of around 22 years, primarily in the field of satellite communications and mobile telecommunications systems. I next want to introduce Yasser Babikar. Yasser is the Chief Technical Officer of Saudi Netlink Company. And Yasser has over 30 years experience in designing and delivering complex solutions and telecommunication projects. And in particular importance, he has a lot of experience in oil and gas, telecom, and critical communication networks. Finally, I'd like to introduce Abdul Aziz Al Daher. He is ST Engineering iDirect's Country Manager for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Abdul Aziz is responsible for creating meaningful partnerships and synergy with companies to develop new communication systems and maximize growth and efficiency. And in previous roles at OneWeb, Inmarsat, and Thuraya, he developed a partner ecosystem to serve the Middle East, growing demand, and led global sector development in agritech, construction, and mining. So as you hear, our panelists combined have decades of experience and in particular, very specialized knowledge of the Middle East region, and in particular, various sectors such as oil and gas, construction, maritime, and mining. So gentlemen, thank you very much for joining this panel. And let us begin. For those of you who signed up for the panel to see this, you know that in the Middle East, a flexible, high bandwidth, low latency, cloud optimized, seamless global network connectivity solution based on satellite is an increasing imperative in many broadband communication networks, and none more so than for telcos and MNOs. In particular, telcos and MNOs in the Middle East, they are facing increasing growth in their need for vast volumes of data, which often must be analyzed and managed. However, costs and the need for a sustainable solution necessitates dependence upon reliable and ubiquitous high performance. So today in this panel, we're going to explore the telecommunication needs in the Middle East and how satellites are helping address these needs. So gentlemen, let's turn to the questions. And the first question I have, let me ask Hamid and Yasser to answer, but certainly Abdul Aziz are free to answer as well. In the Middle East, obviously in other regions as well, telcos and MNOs, they need access to analysis and management of vast volumes of data. What's driving this demand, and are there certain things of particular significance that make the Middle East region unique? Hamid, why don't you take this first?
Yeah, thanks, David, for the introduction, and welcome everybody. So, with people staying and working from home, demand for bandwidth is really skyrocketing, mainly driven by cloud, social media, conferencing, and video applications. Now, we see global internet bandwidth rose last year by around 35%, a substantial increase over the previous year's modest 26%. If we come to the region, in Middle East and North Africa, the average mobile data traffic usage per month per consumer has also really skyrocketed. It has reached around 5.6 gigabytes per month per subscriber. And this was in 2019. And now we are foreseeing it to be increased by more than 5 times to around 30 gigabytes per month per subscriber by 2025. So the increase in data usage is primarily driven by new applications, millions of video streams, cloud access, social media, etc. Increased smartphone penetration, 66% of total MENA mobile connections at present, if I just can recall from my memory, and smartphone penetration we foresee, and these are the data which reveal that it will reach to around 80% by 2025. So then again, the availability of affordable high-speed data networks, this is also the key to the growth. So mobile broadband penetration in this region is expected to increase by to 53% from 43% in 2019. Again, well, we're looking at 4 years from now, it's about 2025. So see, that's where my point of view is. So I'll actually now pass it on to Yasser for his views as well. Yeah.
Thanks very much. So Yasser, Hamid talked about the vastly increase in demand, driven in large part by the applications such as video, the penetration of smartphones. Are you seeing the same thing in Saudi Netlink's markets?
I think the decisive factors are the same. They are being driven by the same factors. The major driver basically is the user behavior and the way users are consuming media. There is more consumptions of multimedia. There is growth in the internet users, penetration in remote areas, as well as penetration in new sectors that used to consume media locally or different format. The other thing is the enterprise driven to connectivity and cloud services. Most of the enterprises, our enterprises, they have migrated significantly from the traditional client server model, local computing, all to cloud services. Combine that with the COVID situation where really it moved more and more enterprises and businesses as well as schools to really remotely work at home or to take their classes at home. But it's not a temporary transition. We believe that this is going to be a permanent impact, and both the user experience now is very important. So the user is expecting to have the same seamless experience wherever he works, whether he's working from home, he's working from office, he's working on his mobile, he's working at a remote location. He expects to have the same user experience.
So the customers' expectations are growing along with their demands. And Abdulaziz, when listening to Yasser, he twice mentioned increasing need to serve remote areas. And certainly telcos and MNOs often face challenges in addressing these markets to expand their networks. Because often expansion, at least in terrestrial, requires build out of fiber and microwave with line of sight infrastructure. And that can create challenges in rolling out to remote areas. Abdulaziz, what issues do Middle East telcos and MNOs face, and where in their network growth planning strategy does satellite play a part?
Thank you, David. And I think this question nicely builds on to the previous one and sort of an extension of the increase of demand that we've seen, and not only just in our own personal use, but I think in sort of countrywide developments, infrastructure plans. I think we now really look 5 years forward and start to plan wisely in terms of which cities need to be connected, because that's how long it can take infrastructure to develop there. And I think if we look at the number of connected devices today at around 20 billion, that's anticipated to triple around 75 within the next few years. So taking that into consideration, 5G deployments on the rise, I think the challenge really remains for businesses to be able to provide that flexible connectivity for all their devices and all of their sites. A construction company building in a city has very different requirements from a construction company asked to build an entirely new smart city, which we're seeing expand significantly in Saudi Arabia. So in areas where this terrestrial coverage is not present or let's say possible at the moment, that's where satellite really complements 5G for key sectors that include broadcast, multicast, aeronautical, maritime comms, clearly emergency disaster recovery, and really that coverage in remote areas that Hamid and Yasser mentioned. So I think in recent years, we've seen significant advances in the satellite systems and the networks, allowing better efficiency, reliability, increased data rates, and really new applications and use cases. So over the next 5 years, we expect more than 100 high throughput satellite systems to be in place, as well as mega constellations in multiple orbits, which are providing terabits per second of capacity across the world. So mPOWER is a great example of this by SES, which uses dynamic allocation technology and has really gone to the next level of optimizing that space segment, right? In combination with the advancements, I believe we at ST Engineering iDirect have brought from a ground segment perspective as well to enable that. And without going into too much detail, technically the combination of SDN, NFV, software-defined networking, network function virtualization is significantly improving performance and increasing business agility. So that, I think through satellite technology, we're bringing these capabilities to the wireless world.
Thanks, Abdulaziz. And Hamid, Abdulaziz mentioned mPOWER, and broadly speaking, the improved performance, both in terms of throughput via satellite, in terms of reliability, in terms of cost coming down, complexity decreasing. Hamid, spend a minute or two talking about satellites, but mPOWER in particular, how you see it as being able to address some of the needs in the Middle East. And are these needs limited to remote areas, or are there other markets that satellite is well equipped to serve? Hamid?
Yeah, so I think it's a very good view that Abdulaziz has given, especially from the the challenges which data brings in now, the high throughput requirements that are there. So see, if I just take a step back, a typical geo satellite with its global beam can actually cover 1/3 of the Earth. So it's all about reach and reliability. So while geo satellites do provide excellent coverage, but most of the use cases of today require lower latency and higher throughput. Historically, O3b networks launched the first commercial communication satellite in medium Earth orbit in 2013. And by placing the satellites in a lower orbit, the round-trip latency was, of course, greatly reduced, while the throughput that could be delivered to the users exponentially multiplied. So after the commercial success of the MEO constellation, we took SES fully acquired O3b networks in 2016, and we quickly started work planning the next generation of MEO satellites, which is O3b mPOWER, which Abdulaziz just mentioned. So see, what we have seen that how it is relevant to the mobile network operators. We have seen that we are addressing different customer applications using MEO and GEO, both. So in some cases, we use both. Now, the high capacity of MEO deployments that we have done for the past 6 years, I'll give you the example of Pacific region, which has enabled, our connectivity has enabled smaller economies to flourish without undersea cables. We have established carrier neutral, multi-tenant point of presence operating in tower aggregation mode to support 3G and 4G backhaul over O3b constellation for MNOs in Pakistan. Now, to add resilience to these, we have, in a few cases, used geo-earth stations as part of the point of presence as well. So as we see, the MNOs are really concerned about whether they're not really concerned about whether the data is transported over geo, MEO, or LEO till the time the KPIs of their applications, which is primarily in this case reliability and performance, that are met, and the network is scalable, and therefore, and their challenging business cases are closed. They're able to generate the revenue which is proportional to the costs that they're incurring in order to reach especially these far-flung areas. So we really are very pleased that with MEO, we have been able to expand the size of the satellite addressable market, which used to be limited to only the very far-flung remote areas. So with the innovation of O3b mPOWER, really our mission is to go mainstream. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Hamid. And Yasser, Hamid was talking about, from an MNO and telco perspective, it's all about reliability and performance. Caring less whether it's GEO or MEO, do you meet their specifications? Yasser, are you seeing the same thing? And do you also see satellite as having an increasing role as performance increases, as complexity decreases, as price perhaps comes down for certain applications? What role are you seeing for satellite in the Middle East now? And to come back to Abdulaziz's 5-year look forward, what do you see? Yasser?
Well, satellite have always been placed in where it will cover the gap of traditional telco solutions in terms of terrestrial, microwave-based, or fiber optic links. So in the old sense, it was just to recover remote areas. But as data consumption actually rise, now it complements more than just terrestrial coverage. It complements the bandwidth gap in most of the regions as the demand gaps and the infrastructure of telecom operators are catching up. There are a lot of now seasonal events. There is a lot of corporates which operate seasonally, like oil and gas. They operate in certain areas and they move. So there is always going to be complementary services that will complement the service of the MNOs. So this will always be there in mobility, in terms of bandwidth on demand. As we migrate eventually into the network of networks, which is the 5G. This is going to be an evolution. It's not going to be a revolution, but we'll see more and more integration now between MNO service and VSAT providers. And actually, the satellite role have always been application driven now. So there is a lot of applications still best fit by satellite, but there is a lot of applications now with SD-WAN and SDNs. You can still segment and you can prioritize your services based on KPIs, considering the cost, the application, and the service requirements. Some services are critical. You can actually route them into more expensive services. You can route least important services on different routes. And we see this a lot. Most of our customers now are moving into managed services. They put their KPIs. They don't care how you deliver the service, as long as you meet KPIs, even if you can going to use multiple of connectivities. As long as you maintain their KPIs, you can still use microwave, LEO, GEO, with different configuration for different applications, and you can segregate this application at the site level. So we see this trend a lot now. And most of our clients, whether in the oil and gas, whether in the government, they are looking into managed services with KPI and SLA. They don't look into owning the best technology or the best X and Y, Z. We want to have a managed services, and you are actually going to be responsible for maintaining these KPIs and SLA.
So yeah, sir, you made a lot of excellent points that I just want to highlight. I mean, and it sounds like from you as well as our other panelists, from the MNO and telco perspective, it's all about meeting the KPIs and the SLAs. It's less about technology. I mean, there's a certain agnosticism about the technology as long as you can meet the KPIs and the SLAs. And
Exactly.
Yep, please go ahead.
No, exactly. I'm just confirming.
Okay. And it sounds like what you're saying is that while satellite may have historically been seen as kind of a niche player in filling, temporary or relatively small gaps, it's more of an infrastructure play now, which I think is really important as we adopt that 5-year horizon that Abdul Aziz spoke about. One of the other points that you mentioned, and I'd like to get into this a little more with all the panelists, is the applications for satellite and mobility. And certainly when we talk about cellular or satellite backhaul ecosystem, that's been very important for many years in the Middle East region. And you and others mentioned 5G, and we're obviously in the midst of a rollout of 5G in the Middle East and other regions of the world, which is referred to as the network of networks. To all of the panelists, but let me start with Hamid. In the Middle East region, what has been the historical significance of the contribution of satellite backhaul? And what's the situation now with the rollout of 5G? How do you see satellite in the 5G world? Hamid?
Yeah, thanks, David. So see, before I come to Middle East, let me just, take a couple of minutes in, covering where globally we are in case of 5G. So I mean, my belief is that we are now in the 3rd year of 5G. So I would say, this should be the actual year of 5G. This is what I believe in, because there have been years of marketing hype, which has resulted in a number of false starts for this exciting new technology. But why I believe that 2021 will be a start, because now we're seeing budgets get freed up, and we are ready to see the final explosion of the next generation low latency mobile technology infrastructure. That is, of course, driven by the number of applications that are ranging from real-time business analytics to examples like connected tractor trailers, etc. So several developments in the past few months actually, lead me to believe this. This includes around $100 million in spending on C-band auction spectrum by North American carriers, as well as increase in capital spending budget by the likes of Verizon and T-Mobile. Now, this really promises that real money is being deployed now. More importantly, the economic climate in the shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic crisis is favorable to 5G. The global economy is presumably recovering, and governments worldwide are pumping in stimulus. We're seeing interest rates likely to remain low for some time, which will favor investments. So last year crisis, again, I would say, has set off a wave of technology evaluations as major industries have to adapt to shutdowns and remote work. All this is pointing to an acceleration of investment in digital transformation technologies, in which I think we all will agree that 5G will play a key role. So see, the top services for 5G, we know the most promising applications and the use cases for 5G, edge cloud from 2021 to 25. It includes wireless broadband, which is, maybe people call it super 4G speeds or whatever. So then streaming media, clouding, cloud gaming, connected vehicles, smart anything, immersive experience of virtual reality, augmented reality. So and list goes on, and probably private wireless networks. So Satellites have been coming back to your question as well. So what we see, satellites have had a major role in connecting the very remote areas, or in case of 2G, then yes, geostationary satellites were able to transport 4G with some tweaking on the GSM gear. With 5G, I believe everybody would be requiring the network slicing to be done, etc. And we at SCS have even tested. I mean, we are actually transporting multiple gigabits of traffic on satellite for 4G, and our testing with the tier 1 mobile network operator for 5G has also been done, and that too in a standalone mode. So that's really promising. So what we see, our next generation satellite system really aligns perfectly well with 5G. O3b mPOWER, which I'm referring to, it arrives just in time to boost 5G acceleration beyond urban centers with its unbeatable reach of high throughput and low latency. So I think as we go along in the discussions, we will talk about how O3b mPOWER aligns with any 5G extension strategy. But I'll hand it over back to you, David, so that you can maybe ask other panelists as well.
Sure.
Thanks.
Thank you, Hamid. You read my mind, and I would like to ask and start with Abdulaziz. Abdulaziz, what's your perspective on satellite backhaul, and how, if at all, will this change with 5G?
I think it was summarized very well by Hamid, and I guess just a point on the satellite industry overall is we really need to look at how we adopt standard-based technologies to fast-track innovations, right? To take well-proven, fully adapted standards such as 3GPPs, 5G from the telco and cellular wireless world, and adopt them to satellite. So we're working on modernizing our architecture based on 5G, on, again, NFV and SDN architecture principles, and we're also developing proven network architectures that provide open APIs for end-to-end network orchestration and business system integration across, again, multi-orbital satellites, terrestrial and mobile networks. So really that innovation, that development, to sum up, gives you an idea that we're geared towards that evolution and that continued contribution to satellite backhaul. And we work very closely with our telcos in the region, because some of their most important and high value customers, they could be that 1% to 5% that remain outside of that terrestrial coverage area, are some of the highest value customers that need to be treated as carefully and as well as possible in providing and extending cellular backhaul in remote areas.
Thank you very much, Abdulaziz. And we're, just for the audience, we are now about halfway through the webinar, and we're starting to get some questions from the audience, which I will start turning to in probably the next 5 or 10 minutes. I would encourage those in the audience, please use the Q&A function button that you see at the bottom of your screen to post questions. And again, just as a reminder, if there are questions that we do not get to within the time we have today, we will post written answers to those questions at gvf.org. Let me now turn to Yasser, and certainly Yasser, you can respond to the question about 5G and the role of satellites, but I want to broaden it out. One of the other panelists mentioned, I think earlier, the Internet of Things. This is something that is related to 5G, but it's more than that. The Internet of Things, or IoT, or IIoT, Industrial Internet of Things, that market is forecast to become one of satellite's major growth areas, at least on a global basis. And Yasser, I'd be interested in hearing your perspective first, but obviously the other speakers as well. What is your perspective on the Internet of Things? How big a market will it be for satellite, and in particular in your region, in the Middle East? as well as 5G, if you want to respond to that as well. Yasser.
Okay, just to start, Internet of Things, basically, it's a very broad term. Basically, it is connecting everything to everything. So it is very application specific. So when you are talking about logistics services, it's different than when you are talking about SCADA for oil and gas. The market, the challenges, the technical challenges for Internet of Things are totally different than what is being used for GSM operators. GSM operators have always been focused on people. So they want to connect to where people are. Now, most of their coverage is focused on population-centric areas, regardless of the geographical area. So even if you are going to have a location of very importance, like a mining location or an oil and gas field, or it is, let's say, an agricultural area where there are a lot of machines, there are a lot of sensors, there are a lot of pipelines, usually have a very poor connectivity for these areas. So the challenges are different. The challenges basically, you need a very light, very power efficient device where you can actually basically install it anywhere. It's not about the people anymore. So there is a huge market for satellite-based still IoT. From our experience, basically, we are working on a lot of solutions, IoT centric, and there is a huge market. It's not going to be all satellite, but the market is very big, that the size of that is focused on satellite only applications is huge. We see it a lot now in the coming. The main challenge in satellite basically is still the power consumption of the satellite terminal in remote areas. This is now being addressed by LEOs and MEOs satellites, which basically the link budget is very affordable. You're not looking for very expensive link budget in terms of power. In terms of bandwidth, it's still very small bandwidth, but still you need to have an efficient deployment. You need something that can be quickly deployed. It does not require a lot of technical knowledge to install it. It's not like the traditional VSAT terminal. So there is a huge expansion in this field. There are a lot of companies now, they are operating like LoRa in the sky services, where you can actually put a small LoRa sensor and there is a small LEO satellite or CubeSat flying just on top of you every few hours. And we see this is a very viable application for satellite in the future. Once there is a constellation that's IoT specific, it will really reduce the cost of connection, and it will reduce the budget on the link and the battery life and the service for this. In terms of 5G deployment, it's always going to complement 5G. Satellite will always be part of the network of networks, and it will always complement G. Basically, when you are deploying 5G solutions, you need to have more density, you need to have more PTS, you need to have more backhaul. So this is going to be a satellite plus advantage, where you need to have a quick, high density connection at a specific location. So they will work together. I don't think there is any real competition between satellite and terrestrial link. They are going to work together. And the growth in data, it is really exponential. It's not even linear. So there is going to be always gap between terrestrial links and the user requirement. And this can only be filled by high throughput satellites, which have a very low latency that can near terrestrial links, which is, we see it happening now with the new generation of MEOs and LEOs.
Thank you, Yasser. And Abdulaziz, I saw you nodding in agreement with a lot of Yasser's optimism, I think, particularly when it comes to the Internet of Things and the applicability to satellite solutions. But let me give you a few minutes to talk about that, Abdulaziz. And then I'd like to hear from Hamid, because Yasser also mentioned the unique capabilities of MEOs and LEOs to address the Internet of Things. And I'd like to finish with Hamid talking about MEO, in particular mPOWER, and how SES sees it addressing markets. And then we'll turn to questions from the audience. And again, please post your questions through the Q&A function. But now over to Abdul Aziz to tell us if I read him correctly, that he's excited about the Internet of Things. Abdul Aziz, please.
Absolutely, David. And Yasser took me through the past 10 years of us using, a lot of different acronyms. M2M, I think, is one out of many that came before IoT. And we continue to see more and more use cases across various sectors. And Yasser really touched upon just about all of them. So he took us through that journey. And I think what we're seeing today is, again, this exponential sort of increase in digitalization overall, right? Whether they're companies, whether they're militaries, governments looking at digitalizing the way they operate. And I think it's been forecasted that the global IoT market would reach $2 trillion by 2028. And that's up from nearly 300 billion last year. So that's a growth rate of about 25% a year. And it's quite significant. So it's coming from many sectors, as we've mentioned, and companies around the world are really looking at IoT to drive these greater efficiencies, improve the bottom line, right, through real-time monitoring of whether they have tens, hundreds, thousands, or even millions of assets, which should lead to better asset utilization, reduced waste, increased output, and most importantly, improved safety. So several key segments, I think, particularly attractive to some of the satellite service providers have been around cargo tracking, really just monitoring containers and items that are being transported on planes as well, not only on vessels, and obviously on roads. So transport companies are relying on IoT for electronic recording of the hours driven, monitoring of operational devices and events, fluid levels, vibrations, speed, and there are even smarter applications out there that know the driver behavior and can tell you a lot more information about it. So it really continues to build on where fleet management as well of heavy machinery. I think during my time in agri-tech, mining, and construction, we saw a lot of emphasis on predictive maintenance there. Oil and gas rigs traditionally have been, very much in common with ships, using IoT to monitor the status of their equipment, putting sensors to monitor the flow rate, the pressure, the health of the valves, motors and pumps, and everything to prevent that leakage and unforeseen failure. So I think at STI Direct, we are now offering new IoT solutions with a pathway to satellite IoT by leveraging all of our existing hub infrastructure, whether that be Evolution, Dialog, or Velocity, and pairing it with compact terminals and optimized IoT waveforms for that low throughput IoT use case that Yasser mentioned. And it will be on display at CAPSAT in case any of you are there.
Thanks, and I hope everyone can go to CABSAT. I know we're looking forward. GVF is organizing some panels for CABSAT at the end of this month. Hamid, over to you. If you can, just summarize SES's perspective on the Internet of Things, and in particular, we've heard and you've talked about mPOWER. What's the role? What makes mPOWER uniquely adept at addressing what we hear is an explosion of demand for Internet of Things, but many other applications? So Hamid, please, over to you.
So what I would say that first of all, Yasser very well touched upon the, I would say on the IoT and the way it has been actually covered very well by Abdul Aziz. And so if we just take a step back again, in case of IoT, it's usually a low throughput requirement. But when it comes with volumes and when we are actually, there is a requirement to support those kind of mega industrial level of data, then it comes to, the requirement, the requirement then starts dictating a high throughput connectivity. and most definitely, I would say, although on an individual level, it is a low throughput requirement, but when it comes to the application need for latency, then it comes back to a non-geo satellite, which makes all the sense in order to add that right kind of value in transporting the data. So and again, with our system, what I can tell you with the advancement, and not only for O3b mPOWER, I can share it with you that with O3b, we have been able to hold our ground despite the advent of fiber in certain geographies. So with even more higher throughputs, which are going to be collection of all these IoT as well as I think use cases and examples that all our panelists have given, including myself. So there is a need for higher reliability and much more cost-effective non-geo offerings. And this is where we believe satellite will have a space in not only for the very remote areas, but also in the peripheries of the urban centers, and like semi-urban communities, and of course much more traction from remote areas where traditionally the business case was never positive. So yes, there is where and where we are heading. I think the second part of your question was about how we are seeing it with our MEO. So I would say with O3b mPOWER, we have the same mission that we had with O3b. It is about far greater coverage, more flexibility, and here is and that kind of flexibility where we could use the same pool of bandwidth for any enterprise or for any mobile network operator to use that bandwidth at one place or in one geographical location, and then maybe reuse it somewhere else, wherever the requirement actually dictates. So then we are expanding the market. So O3b mPOWER, as we see, it really greatly expands SES ability to pursue the goal and other goals at the same time. So this goal of IoT connectivity and much more applications. So see, we are having that, we are on that roadmap. O3b constellation is also not going anywhere anytime soon. So it will continue to make a difference in the lives of people around the world who would otherwise have limited or no ability to benefit from that kind of connectivity with low latency. So beginning in, as I think we have, but I should tell the audience, O3b mPOWER is coming over commercially fully available in 2022, and it will reach many times more people and bringing them even greater connectivity and tools to thrive in their businesses and daily lives. So as we see, we have embraced the same model which we will follow. So we are best positioned to execute on the goal of connecting the carriers and government customers and deliver broadband to end users. And as I think I mentioned that even in case of 5G, one of the use cases is really very high broadband. So and the key strengths really would be uncontended services, uncontended bandwidth, so that the enterprises or the mobile network operators, etc., they will be able to build in their own contention mechanisms to actually continue providing carrier grade and high throughput and low latency.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, Hamid, you mentioned something, and I'm now turning to the questions from the audience, and thanks very much to those in the audience. The first question I want to ask, first of Hamid, but the others, and it comes from Abdullah Harmal, and it's actually A question I often hear, or a comment. Abdullah is saying that satellite is a good solution, as we've heard, for remote and rugged areas and for mining as one example. But he says that official and private sectors consider satellite as not cost effective. And essentially is very expensive, particularly in developing countries. And that is something I think historically we've heard in the industry a lot. But there have been a lot of technological developments, not just the emergence of high throughput satellites, but that certainly has driven it. I'd like to ask, what is the opinion of the panelists on the issue of cost effectiveness of satellite solutions outside of the remote areas or particular sectors that can afford service at any price? Who wants to take that question first?
I can take it.
Okay.
Yeah, if it's fine. So see, this is a very good question, and actually, I think in our discussion, I did touch upon expanding the market size. This is exactly what SCS has been able to achieve with O3b. And we will definitely be making it even more optimum as we move along on O3b mPOWER. So see, previously, I'll just give you an example. Traditionally, if we had to transport around 2 gigabits of traffic over in a certain remote areas, and if that remote area did not have fiber connectivity or reliable fiber connectivity, and or the microwave communication was not up to speed, and it had all the other challenges of security, power, etc. There was actually no option but to compromise and be connected or semi-connected on some sort of a linear fiber, etc. And the consideration of satellite, if at all, was limited to I would say some few megabits, and that too to have that bare minimum communication, or maybe just a backup to a less reliable fiber. But what has happened since 2015, and this will be a very important part, I think, which the audience should know. We have seen more than 500 venture-backed space startups that have been formed. Likewise, since 2015, the industry has attracted nearly 17 billion of investment. This is nearly up to 20 times more than what has been happening in the prior decade. So we see GEO or MEO HTS supply expecting to grow over 19 times to more than 100 terabits per second in the next 9 years, from 5.7 terabits in 2020. So this is the great news for the industry and especially consumers, as there are more connectivity solutions available for them. So I would say the question is great, but even from our side, on the business side, it helps us as the general belief that satellite connectivity is expensive. This myth is being dismantled, because those remote areas which I referred to in the example where a 2 gigabits connectivity has to be provided to a remote area, that remote area, of course, could not afford the kind of expenses or the revenue that could be generated from that remote areas could never match justify laying the fiber there, or even using the traditional satellites with the traditional rates. So this is a reality of today, and this is, I think, I didn't follow the name of the question, the person who asked the question, but this is the reality of today, that yes, the prices on satellite and especially from the STS satellites and more specifically on low latency HTS satellites have really are in a different league at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you, Hamid. And so Abdulaziz and Yasser, Hamid talked about the myth of satellite being expensive. Maybe it was in the past, but with the vastly increased supply of capacity and bandwidth, is it a myth? Or is it a legitimate concern that satellite is too expensive for many, many markets? Do either of you care to respond to that topic?
Yeah, I'll just briefly touch this topic, but basically, yes, traditionally, this statement was significantly yes. And that's why satellite was based on basically industries which actually require this connectivity because there is no alternative. As Mr. Hamid mentioned, pulling a terrestrial link, whether it is fiber or it is microwave, you have to build so many relay towers until you reach a rural area. It would be much more expensive than the user requirement at the time, and the cost to build the infrastructure and the timeline. It's much easier to, over the same period of time, to deploy the satellite link much, much cheaper than the alternatives. But it is, you cannot compare it to an existing terrestrial link in city where there is fiber or connectivity already built. But that actually have changed significantly in the last few years. The major challenges for satellite links traditionally was the very high cost of launching a satellite. It was $500 million plus per launch with the satellite and everything. Now we see very small satellites in the LEO that cost 10 million or even less than that. The latency have been significantly changed from 500 millisecond to sub 100 millisecond. The capacity of the traditional satellites used to be sub gigabit capacity for the whole satellite, which will cost you 500 million. Now you can have tens of gigabits capacity per the same satellite. So the costs have significantly been driven down. And if you watch the news with the SpaceX, Starlink, now they are launching it with tens of thousands of satellites at a very small entry price. So there is a very different price level when you are talking about 20 years back, 10 years back, and now. And this is reality. I'm talking about reality. Now you can buy 150 megabits link in the US for a $99 subscription. This was unheard of 10 years back. So this is actually based on a historical fact, but the reality now is changing very rapidly. As we talk now, there are a lot of constellations in the LEO and the MEO. It's going to drive competition. It's going to drive the cost down, especially with the LEO, actually challenging the cost per launch, it's challenging the latency, challenging the space segment available for a spot, because they usually you have a huge amount of bandwidth for a very small coverage. A spot usually could be 100 or less kilometer before you have 3 satellites covering the globe with very limited bandwidth at the satellite level. So I think this is changing a lot, and I think in the few coming years you will see end user links through satellite very comparable to terrestrial fiber, and this is in the rural areas.
Thank you. So it is very much a different world. Well, it may have been true that satellite was expensive. It's a different world, and the cost of satellite is very much much more attainable for many applications, not just in the cities, but throughout the region. I want to give Abdulaziz an opportunity, if he cares, to talk about cost issue, but I also want to relay a question we got from Sahal Mehrabanzad of Hughes, where they're asking, what does the panel think about defense applications on satellites? So Abdulaziz, over to you to talk if you want about cost, but also defense applications. Thank you.
Thanks, David. So I think it was very well covered by Hamid and Yasser. And yes, cost efficiencies are something MNOs look at closely as well when they target their customers. And if the average revenue per user is lower in a region, they have to consider a lot of different aspects, such as the CapEx, the OpEx, and the quality of service that they can provide. So I think that total cost of ownership has reduced significantly with the cost of terminals decreasing year on year with the increase of capacity. So we do see those prices continuing to go down, but we've also seen that there's more equipment from the RAN side, the RAN CapEx, that helps make the business case for expanding that network coverage more attractive. So we engaged with Facebook on the telecom infrastructure project, where we learned the best way to lower ARPU was with cost-effective technologies that had small cells in place and open RAN, disaggregated RAN. So I think we're really considering the entire ecosystem as well as that total cost. And really touching on Sahed's question, which I think really applies to everything we spoke about. But personally, I've seen very fit in terms of defense applications have been, again, growing significantly, but very much with data security coming in mind. So regulators have been very strict about that data sovereignty, about having ground infrastructure in country to protect data. But I think governments and militaries go that extra 9 yards to make sure they own that infrastructure, that they deploy a teleport of their own, that they lease capacity from satellite operators like SES and work with managed service providers like Saudi Netlink to be able to have that end-to-end service, that service contract. And we do see that increase of dependency on I guess, locally provided solutions in terms of that data security. And being able to apply their own encryptions as well, right? So many countries have developed their own encryptions. They want that to be compatible with the systems that you're providing. So sometimes you go through a strenuous process of testing your equipment, making sure it's of an acceptable quality. But once it gets there, you're very well positioned to continue promoting your product or service. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Abdulaziz. And we're coming very close to the top of the hour, and I will ask both our panelists and our audience to stay just a few minutes past the top of the hour. We have several other questions, but there is one question I'd like to get to, and what we ever do not get to, again, please go to gvf.org in the next couple of days, and you will see written responses to those questions that we didn't have a chance to get to. Perhaps the final question I want to ask of all the panelists, and I think it's more an observation as well as a question, and it comes from Nick Korcheski. And if I can capture what Nick is saying, well, with more capacity coming online, new constellations, as we've heard about, the costs of satellite connectivity is coming down. Are you all, the panelists, seeing that these trends are actually helping the mobile network operators grow their customers, which is their bottom line? How is satellite contributing to the MNO bottom line? So let me open it up for any of the panelists to address what may be the final question before we finish. Who wants to take this first?
I can take it if that is okay.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So see, I mean, it's a very good question, actually. Why? Because being a satellite operator, if we are going for a new constellation, like we went for O3b first, and now we're going for O3b mPOWER, it is very important to see where the consumption of our capacity would be. And right from the beginning, I would say in 2014, when we started commercial operations, we had two distinct choices. One, in terms of connecting the unconnected, I would say, whether we would go directly to the consumers, or we go through the mobile network operators who have the infrastructure and the processes and the system and the infrastructure to actually provide the service to provide internet to the consumers, and to build them as well, and provide those quality of experience, etc., downstream from their network. So we went with the mobile network operator's choice, and now then we have actually become inherently embedded as a partner with a mobile network operator, because unless they grow, unless their demand grows, only then our capacity would be utilized. So it is so we are a stakeholder with mobile network operators, and hence I would give you an example that okay, before I give you, I'll tell you that we actually want then, because of that stakeholder situation, that the mobile operators should expand their 4G services or their data services to newer geographies, and wherever they're present, they should upgrade those. So all of these is in our interest as well. And hence, we have to make it possible what Abdul Aziz just pointed out. There is CapEx, there is OpEx, there is a total cost of ownership. We have to make that total cost of ownership onto that benchmark, which makes them to actually take the network onwards to the remote areas, and or to upgrade the network in order to get those additional revenue streams that is in their interest and in our interest. So this is how we see it, and this is what we are actually living for the last 7 years, I would say. And we with O3b mPOWER, we want to actually take it to the next level of doing amazing innovations in this space, and with I would say with ground segment partners like ST Engineering, iDirect, we would like to have a combined impact, that which can drive the business growth of the mobile network operators. Yeah.
Thank you, Hamid. And before we conclude, I just want to give Yasser, Abdul Aziz, and Hamid a final opportunity for brief remarks, just to summarize their perspective on this topic of connectivity demands, satellites in the Middle East. So Yasser, very briefly, any final words from you?
Yeah, I'd like just to stress on that there will be always place for satellite within the operator domain. It's going to be part of their services to complement. It's going to always fill the gap in mobility, in terrestrial coverage, in rural area coverage. Actually, one of the strengths things that the satellite will provide is growth, accelerated growth for satellite operators to be deployed quickly. That means you can meet the end user demand very quickly for high bandwidth. And this is very critical for network operators, if they can actually meet the demand of the end user quickly in terms of bandwidth requirement, in terms of connectivity requirement. That means they are going to grow and they are going to capitalize more on the market share. And this is a very important long-term strategy, the user acquisition. So this where satellite can actually fill this gap. The other thing, lowering the total cost of ownership, as we mentioned, that the infrastructure in terrestrial network for remote areas is very expensive. Satellite can provide a much lower cost overall. And most important thing at the end is flexibility. You can actually move your bandwidth around where it is needed for all kinds of seasonal bandwidth requirement for any events. So usually you'll have a huge pool that you can actually deploy wherever. We have here lots of now seasonal event and Hajj. We have a lot of tourism events that will happen in remote areas on a very specific location that require huge bandwidth that will exhaust the infrastructure in that location. You cannot build your infrastructure to accommodate the maximum demand. That will be very expensive if its utilization is going to be very low. So this where satellite will always complement mobile network operators, and we usually work hand in hand with them in delivering services to the end user.
Thank you, Yasser. Very good summary. Abdulaziz, any final words briefly from you?
So I think just something to help summarize what Nick asked, and I think what Suhail asked, and what Hamid and Yasser just touched based on, that level of flexibility is increasing. I mean, satellite solutions in the past could have been a take it or leave it scenario. This is what you have, and that level of flexibility did not exist like it does today. And I think an excellent example of what I've seen with SES's O3b mPOWER is that flexibility of owning your own ground infrastructure. And that's very important to a telco that wants to increase its coverage in certain areas when it owns that ground infrastructure and consider that total cost of ownership. And again, it's very important for that government client that obviously wants, gigabytes per second. They want that increase of bandwidth, but at the same time, they need to take that data security into consideration. They need to have that flexibility and that convenience of landing traffic in country. So I think that is a lot easier to do today than it was 5 or 10 years ago. The business cases were a lot more difficult to justify than they are today. So I think we welcome panelists, and we welcome potential prospects that have spoken to satellite operators in the past to revisit them and to see the advancements that have been made. And thank you very much for having me.
And thank you, Abdulaziz. So a recurring theme, I think, throughout the hour, and I'll give Hamid the floor in just a minute for final remarks from him, is that technology markets have changed, and for the better from an MNO and telco perspective when it comes to utilizing satellite and its unique ability to provide ubiquitous connectivity anywhere and anytime in a reliable manner. So Hamid, final brief comments from you before I conclude the webinar.
Yeah, David. So I think thank you very much for conducting it this webinar in such a I would say it was a great discussion. All my fellow panelists really brought quite a thought leadership on the floor. So I think that it has gone very well, and of course I think this discussion, this engagement needs to continue, and yeah, so we are open to questions even after this webinar. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Hamid, and thank you all panelists. This does bring us to the conclusion of the webinar. And again, I want to really thank our sponsor, SES, for this webinar. As I mentioned before, all the questions, and there were several that we did not manage to answer during the live program, will be responded to in writing and posted next to the video on GVF's website, gvf.org, in the next couple of days. And you can watch a recording of this and the previous webinars on gvf.org. And in particular, I would encourage the audience, take a look at the recording of September's webinar that was sponsored by SES, which discussed the unique African market and how satellite is addressing these unique needs in the African region. So with that, I want to thank again our panelists, as well in particular the audience, and I wish everyone a very good day. Thank you all.